I found this thing on the screen. I haven't actually watched it yet because I find it too much of a weird video idea. But I will do this in a blind watch and go from there.
As scientific understanding has advanced, more and more people have grown skeptical of old religious ideas, myself.
As for why I'm saying doing this is because I find the whole idea preposterous. The whole statement that it's impossible to not be religious is a stupid statement, and I just want to see what the rationale behind it is.
Included. But what secular people fail to understand is that they aren't getting rid of a religious worldview, they are just replacing it with a new one. No matter how hard you try, you can never truly escape the religious dimension. This isn't just semantic wordplay either. Religion evolved as an answer to fundamental questions about the world and our place in it. Modern society seems to think that it has avoided these questions by proving our previous answers to be wrong, but that's not really true. What they have done is give new answers. By giving new answers to these questions, they have created a new religious system called atheism.
That's where my first contention is. Sorry, voice cleared. That's where my new contention is to this. By calling atheism a religious system makes no sense, as atheism itself does not hold onto any morality itself, doesn't hold onto any values itself, other than just that of not believing in a god, or gods, or spirituality, or higher power, whatever. Say what you want about it. But the point is, there's nothing about it which is even akin to a religion.
An atheist is not outside looking in on religion with a critical eye. They are within the same sphere as every other religion, giving answers to the same questions that religions have always attempted to answer. In this way, atheists are people.
And this is why I can sense some form of dishonesty here, because to some extent, yes, you have to deal with some of the religious apologetics, but do you have to live exclusively in that compound? No. When dealing with religious people, you need to understand enough as to deal with their religious arguments and the religious people themselves. But what the difference is that as atheists, you can stand by whatever you want, and you can break from a lot of the main narratives of religion quite easily. It's not that difficult. So I find this a very dishonest framing.
Who have the religious belief that God does not exist, among other things. It's an important distinction because I think so far, atheism has had it fairly easy. Its role has largely been one of criticism of religion while avoiding any responsibility to give their own affirmative answers. Of course, it's much easier to criticize someone else's idea than it is to provide an idea of your own.
But this is the thing, though. Atheism isn't a thing of creating alternate ideas or morals. And that's something in which people need to understand as well. That's all atheism is, detachment or criticism of religion. It's nothing more, nothing less.
If atheism wants to be treated seriously, I think it should be required to provide some sort of coherent worldview. Atheism acts as if it's in the peanut gallery, mocking the jokers in the spotlight. It has yet to realize that it's actually on stage with the rest of us.
And this is the thing, though. Worldviews. Okay, let's say. Okay. An atheist worldview is not necessarily something in which that even exists. So I'll then pose this question to this video person. If you want to talk about an atheist worldview itself, how are you going to be clarifying and working with that religious worldview?
For example, it seems to me that atheism should be required to give a more coherent account of its creation story, provide.
There isn't one. There literally isn't an atheist creation story. It isn't one.
A more thorough portrayal of what it means to have a subjective experience in the world, and answer how they think one ought to live.
But that's the most common consensus that has always been, though, to my knowledge anyway, that it's down to your own personal value and what you get out of it personally. There's no. And how do you, as a person, basically define it? That's the most common assumption and direction I've seen.
For the creation story, atheists will point to the Big Bang, but this is a weak creation story at best. It's very good at describing what comes after the universe is created, but offers no insight into where all of this material stuff comes from. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. If energy can't be created, how did the universe come into existence? Seems like a glaring contradiction of their own system.
Not really. The reason I say not really is because at the end of the day, we don't claim to know exactly what happened before the expanse of the universe. No one, I don't think, has ever said that. It's only really the religious fetish that has the idea around wanting to know what was before the expanse of the universe. If one day we find out what did come before the expanse of the universe, cool. If we don't, whatever. There's no reason to assume or to say something is there that we can't prove.
Something akin to a scientific miracle. An atheist might respond that we don't know the answer yet, but we will in the future. But this feels like a cop out. It amounts to faith, which is perfectly fine in your personal life.
And no, that's not faith. But faith is blind belief or blind trust. That not knowing and maybe finding the future is just honesty. Because you don't know. The religious people who talk about the creation of the universe doesn't actually know anything about the creation of the universe. It's a answer, just a answer. Is it a factual answer? Unlikely. But is it a answer? Sure. It's an answer from faith. Answer from religion. But the saying that we don't know, so you can't really judge, so on, it's not a faith-based position because it's not relying on a presupposition of there being a creator being.
But if you want to play on the same playing field as everyone else, you have to abide by the same rules. Faith.
But as I said, atheism does not play on the same playing field as theism itself. It operates in its own entity outside of it. It does not work on faith-based claims.
Is not a good enough answer. If religions aren't allowed to use faith to justify their beliefs to you, then you can't use faith to justify yours to them.
Atheism isn't using faith arguments against religion. Saying you don't know and you might find out in the future is not faith, as I said.
As for subjectivity, atheists point to electrical activity in the brain, but this is an underwhelming answer as well. Saying that our subjective experience is no more than neurons firing is like saying that music is no more than sound waves. While technically true, it does not capture the mystery of the experience we are referring to.
But that's the whole point. That you don't need to make everything a massive mystery. Neurons in the brain, music being sound, is completely fine answers because that's actually correct. It's much like how the brain can use chemical pheromones to get the body to function. It's just how you work. You don't need the mystery of the experience to it. Life just is.
It is a misdirection at best. The subjective experience is, in my opinion, one of the most perplexing aspects of the universe. It would make much more sense for blind, dumb matter to be bumping into itself without an awareness of it. Awareness itself is incredibly strange. Pointing at the physical material within the world as if that is an explanation of subjective consciousness is ridiculous. As for the last bit, a secondary role of religion is as a society-wide model for how one ought to live. There are periods of history when religion became overbearing in this capacity. The Inquisition comes to mind. But in a healthy society, its use case remains relevant. The role needs to be filled by someone or something.
Not necessarily, because if the moral fibre of the people themselves is firm and not corrupted anyway, you don't even need religion to have that. Religion, I'll say this, and I'll try to make it sound as sensitive, as insensitive as sorry, words. I spoke up recently. Sorry, sound as clear as possible. If you're struggling with moral dilemmas and knowing what is right to do in the world, you're probably more on a dumber level of things, and you don't have much critical thinking in the first place. And if that is the case, and you need to be told how to act to be moral, you're not necessarily a moral person. You're then someone who needs to learn more about critical thinking and how to learn to be moral yourself, and have it function independently from being told how to be moral.
That can be unintentional or intentional, but it will be filled one way or another. Atheists have not yet answered the question of how one ought to live. When the question
Again, atheism itself does not answer that question, because that does not necessarily fit in the burden of proof area in around religion and atheism itself. And again, to clarify, it is primarily about do you believe in a god or not. Nothing about atheism implies that you will answer the question of how one ought to live, or how one should live, or how one should act and do. It's not that sort of system.
is broached, the answer seems to be akin to nihilism. We are particles moving around in the universe with no purpose beyond surviving and reproduction.
Ah, this is where another issue I found with this is just on my first watch. Nihilism with no purpose beyond surviving and reproduction. That is one view to it, and if you hold that position, you hold that position. You don't. But as I said though, some people can be complete atheists and not care much for reproduction or wanting to have children or wanting a family, and that's fine. And what happens in that situation is then your purpose changes to something else. You make it something more suitable for your life direction. If you want to help people, you can help people in many ways. You don't necessarily need to suit that exact purpose. This is a subjective stance of which is actually warping the whole perspective around this.
Do as you please. But do as you please isn't a very good answer. If you scale that model out to size, you end up with some rather unpleasant consequences.
No, you don't, because when it says do as you please and all that shit, it's not saying do as you please, even if there's negative consequences. Because normally on top of that, there's some harm principles applied to it, as to make sure that what you want to do isn't that self-destructive or hurting other people too much. So, to that extent, the subjective meaning of life model is often in a controlled setting, in which if you are a moral person, you know your limits and you know not to hurt other people in the first place. So that dynamic should be a place. And if it's implying that do as you please would result in something like drug addiction or alcohol addiction or rape or murder, that's a whole separate subcategory of things happening in that situation. For example, if there are people who fell into addictions because of their pleasings, they need to go to rehab or detoxification to get rid of it. If they are rapists or murderers, sure, lock them up, make them suffer the consequences of their actions, as all actions has a consequence, even regardless of if you are a theist or atheist.
the rising deaths of despair being just one example. There is the introduction of ethical utilitarianism as a sort of secular ethical structure, but in practice, this justifies some unsettling actions, such as a doctor who kills a healthy person to harvest their organs for others who are dying. If this were actually practiced, we would have this person jailed, and in my opinion, we would be justified for doing so. Even in its less extreme instances, utilitarianism raises many questions. If you remember right, this is the system which came to the conclusion that normal people are evil because they don't give all of their money to charity. Moving on, it's important to remember that
I won't say anything about utilitarianism here and now because it's not relevant. I'll keep going in to the point of where it's relevant.
despite some claims to the contrary, religion is a human product. It's going to be flawed one way or another. Atheism doesn't need to have all the answers perfectly figured out right this moment, but at least do us the courtesy of actually engaging in the game you are pretending not to play. This moment in theology.
But this is the issue, though. Again, as I said, you don't have to play along and give the answers to things which you cannot answer. If you play along and give answers to things that you are pretending to know or claim to know, then you are just doing the same crime as a lot of religious people themselves. And that is pretending to have arrogance or pride about knowing something in which you do not know about at all. And then you are no better. You're no better than the people you are critiquing. You're then equally as much a hypocrite as the religious people themselves.
Logical history that we are living in today is poorly understood. Atheism has only recently staked its flag in the sand, and has really only needed to contend with a very specific type of theology, which only came around a short time before atheism itself arrived. Let me explain. Atheism as we see it today began to appear during the Enlightenment era in the 1700s, as technological advances allowed people to throw off the previous social structure, both political and economic. But the religious system which Europe in the 1700s was involved in had only come about during the Reformation, which began in the year 1517. That means it was only around for about 200 years. During the Reformation, the idea of God became something anthropomorphic, physical, and logical. The idea of God was pulled out of its cloud of unknowing and made manifest. By doing so, the theologians of the time opened the doors wide open to anyone who wanted to poke holes in their story. Before the 1500s, God had remained outside of the world. Now that he was considered to be a literal entity within the universe, it didn't take much to disprove his existence. I'm not a Christian, so please don't take this as a Christian apology. I'm merely pointing out that the religious thinkers that were at work just before the Enlightenment had constructed a house of cards by insisting on the literal factuality of their religious doctrine. This was a new feature. The resistance to such figures such as Copernicus and Galileo, because they contradicted the biblical story, is indicative of this rigidity of European belief at the time. But this sort of literal rigidity wasn't in play before the 1500s, and it isn't inherent in most other religions. I would argue that any healthy religious movement understands that its stories are metaphorically true while being literally false. There are plenty of other iterations of theology.
But anyways, the question is, I'm just playing along with him here, just for the sake of it. If they accept that they are false, why follow in the first place? What's the point? And that's what I don't understand about this logic.
Which understand this, and as such are not threatened by scientific discoveries in any way. An atheist may respond saying, what good is religion if it's not literally true? Is it really anything more than a children's story? It's a fair point as far as it goes, but I think it misses something fundamental, which is that this world we live in is unbelievably strange. Not because I don't understand how rain works, but because I'm having a subjective human experience. We live with it every day.
Yes, things are strange. Some things are even unexplainable to some extent. And that, so what? I mean, so what? Why does that even matter? Something's being strange and unexplainable doesn't necessarily imply that it is a bad thing, and you should adopt some form of theism around it. Sure, some things are strange. Let some things remain strange, and let some parts of the earth remain untapped, and not touched if possible. Let it happen, because at the end of the day, in those strange places, there will still be their own subset of animals and plants and creatures in there which live their own lives separate from us. We can live on with that fine. We don't need that. We don't need to know everything at all times, do we?
So we become numb to it. But if you really think about it, this is insane. Who am I, really? What am I doing here? What is the word I referring to? Am I really just a more complicated bacteria formed from some chance chemical reactions in a lifeless ocean billions of years ago, which emerged from thin air in a big bang out of nothing? If so, then why am I aware of it? What does awareness mean? Just some carbon atoms being shocked in such a way that they form a memory that can later be.
These questions are mostly irrelevant to this discussion. These are good questions to be answered, but not in the scope of religion and atheism itself. Is there value in understanding these things? Because understanding ourselves is equally as important as understanding nature and the society around us. But that's regardless of the point.
Reformulated? I'm not convinced that that adequately explains the mystery of what is happening here. And this is really where atheism fumbles the ball. In order for it to be taken seriously, it destroys the mystery, or at least attempts to negate it. There is nothing very interesting about us at all, they say. Just some meatbags looking for sex. Think of it this way. Let's say you're at a really good concert and the music is speaking to you. You're dancing and getting lost in the rhythm. The sensation of having the sound move you is almost surreal, and the elation entering your mind as you connect to something outside yourself is nearly overwhelming. An atheist would describe this whole experience as a series of footsteps. Your knee moved up 6 inches, then your left foot.
I can't comment on this, so that's why, because I don't go to performances. I don't really like live music that much. I don't really listen to music that much either, so I can't comment on this. I'll let him show a sample and think about something to say about it.
Rotated back 30 degrees. The music was at 120 decibels and 60 beats per minute. They mapped the whole thing out this way. But if we're really being honest with ourselves, is this a good way to describe that experience? Isn't something lost in translation? Is it more accurate to describe reality this way? Absolutely. But in focusing on the accuracy of material details, you have lost the more subtle aspects of your subjective experience of the moment. This mysterious thing, which is greater than the sum of its parts, is shuffled under the rug, not to be spoken about. The thing which makes the experience worth remembering is reduced to an annoying byproduct, something to be dismissed as irrelevant.
Okay, now he's finished this point. I think that's really unfair a point to say. By him trying to use that analogy as to say that instead of viewing the thing as something that you just lose yourself to, and okay, first things first. If you're listening to some music or playing a game, whatever, let's apply it for both because the same effect can occur, and you get really attached and immersed to it. That itself is not equal to the religious or theistic mindsets around religion itself. So I do not understand this point here. Is it fine to get some immersion into things? Of course it's fine. But as you know, with stuff like games and music, its immersion is created by something. You know how it's made. Cool. Fantastic. So, and that's why it's fine to enjoy, because it's something actually physical. It's something that's not necessarily going to be something used against you or something that's going to demand you do X or Y against your will, basically, within its morality system. You do it, immerse, enjoy return to life. It doesn't have any greater impact beyond that. And that's what I don't. And maybe he's trying to imply something else here, but I just don't see how it relates to being religious. If you think you know what he means by that, tell me, and I can probably try and understand it more. But as it is, I don't relate or understand to his point.
But that mystery is exactly what religion is about. No religious system worth taking seriously believed that it had literally true, infallible answers to the world. All it was doing was trying to get
No religious system. That's correct. Religious systems are primarily based on myth, mystery, and legends. That is correct. But the issue is, as I said in the beginning, atheism is not a religion at all. So I don't know why. So this whole dynamic he's dealing with here is completely stupid, and he's no better than a Christian apologist in this.
us to remember this mysterious aspect of our reality, since it is so easy to get lost in the mundane minutiae of our day to day life. Atheism's response to this effort is to say, yes, but you're wrong. No shit. But so are you. Religious literalism is a dead end, and one which is only a small part of our wider religious heritage. It's time to move past it. Perhaps atheism will evolve and become a stronger religious doctrine, but
Okay. This is where the issue I have with this again is. Perhaps atheism will evolve and become a stronger religious doctrine. But atheism itself has no religious doctrine. It has no central doctrine. It has no central doctrine to it. So about that, I had to change the thing quickly because it's on a timer.
perhaps atheism will evolve and become a stronger religious doctrine. But until it realizes that that's exactly what it is, a religious doctrine,
Okay, this is where I don't like his intention. By saying that until it realizes exactly what it is, a religious doctrine is completely false. It's approaching the discussion of atheism in a completely wrong direction, as to imply that atheism itself is something in which is not just as complicated as everything else. The only thing atheism has in relation with the theistic mindset is that there's distinct factions. That's it. How, for example, there's just the pure atheists who just don't know much about why they have that position, but just don't believe in a god. There's the secular humanists who actually uphold a more belief system founded on atheism. Sorry. Or there's ones which are atheist and also are a political mindset people, and then in that situation, atheism and that mindset are two separate tracks, with atheism being the far inferior model. So, for example, that's what the difference is. But sign that unites all of those groups is primarily that to claim about atheism itself is true, at least by their lives. And that's it. There's no doctrine, and and I'd also like to ask then, how could you even propose an atheist doctrine that would unite everyone, especially given there is a dynamic in play to this which you cannot necessarily enforce a doctrine because it's not a faith system, it's not this or this that, it's not that. There's no churches, there's no bishops, there's no pope, there's no clergy, there's no governing body, whatever you want. There's no imams, no rabbis, nothing like that. Nothing that can even be equivalent to that in terms of this. So this is where it's complete nonsense in this video. And he's ultimately just saying a Christian apologist video here, regardless of stance on religion itself.
I just don't see it happening. In the meantime,
You just don't see it happening because it won't ever happen because atheism is not a religion.
I will be looking for a better description of this transcendent mystery we call life. Hit the like button and subscribe.
No, he's just going to be doing that to finish off. But so, but if he's more primarily about transcendence in life, why the fuck would I care necessarily about your pursuit of transcendence in life? If you don't want to be atheist, and if the nature of atheism is not suitable for you, don't be an atheist. If you want the transcendence of life and you can't have enough critical thought or critical ability to go out there and find meaning in things yourself, no one can help you. This sounds like very much like a you issue, which I guess it is a you issue if you're making this, obviously. But the point is, don't try and blame atheism and say it's impossible to not be religious. Because I know many people who act completely in a non-religious way and don't find any of these mysteries all that compelling. It's just a you issue, and stop trying to scapegoat atheism because of a you issue.